Hello, my name is Monty Yellowbird Sr. I'm also known as Black Pinto Horse. I'm an educator, cultural consultant, and also a professional artist. Before we get talking about Indigenous Peoples Day, I really want to acknowledge our ancestors, the people that have passed on, and those other people here in the United States that have passed on during this very tragic time in our lives. First of all, acknowledging, because I live in the Southwest, acknowledging all the people of the Southwest in this area, the Pueblos and the Navajos and the Apaches and those here that originally lived in this area. I'm only a guest here, and so I want to acknowledge them, and I want to acknowledge their ancestors and their medicines and their teachings and their way of life as well, because I'm only a guest. I'm Rikaran Hiraza from the three affiliated tribes, and I'm here in this location as an artist and an educator, and I've been asked to talk on behalf of Indigenous Peoples Day. When I think about the ideal of Indigenous Peoples Day, I really think about how small of a step this really is for our native people here in the United States. Because when we're talking about Indigenous people, we're talking about acknowledging another category or another designation or words on how we're categorized. When the Europeans first came, Columbus first came and acknowledged the people that were here, of course we were first known as Indians. And Indians are, from my understanding, come from India. That's a designation that's given to them, although within India there are different groups, with different religious understandings and teachings and different groups within India, but we've designated them as the Indians. Another term that was used was American Indians. And American Indians came around the time that we were designated as citizens of the United States. Citizens of our own country, of our own nation, our own land. There was a Congress passed a bill called the American Citizenship Act of 1924 that legislatively made us citizens of our own country, which is, it gave us some rights to do things or just to be acknowledged. During when we talk about the different rights and that were given to different nations or different peoples here in the United States as a result of being citizens, during this time is a time of voting and change for the nation. The native people were given the right to vote in every state in 1964. And so we were really last to be recognized to have a voting right in our own country. The African Americans, according to the 14th Amendment, of course it was ratified to the 15th Amendment, to give them the rights to vote back in 1869 to 1870. Then the women's vote, the 19th Amendment was 1924, and so they were allowed to vote to really designate a leader within a country that really wasn't theirs. Of course, the Constitution, when we talked about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, which really made Indigenous peoples' land was really taken and made to be their land, and so that they would govern. In the Constitution, we're mentioned in the Constitution, and unfortunately we're mentioned as merciless savages. So, you know, then when we talk about the ideal of words and labeling and being designated as, I think it really boils down to the ideal of respect and honor, and what the populations are really being taught. And so us as Native people on Indigenous Peoples Day is just a very, very small step to acknowledging the fact that we're still being categorized, we're still being labeled and marginalized as a people. Because if we were to celebrate every day for each nation here in the United States, it would be over 574 plus days. Each day would be designated for each tribal nation, which is, there's not enough days in the year. But again, like I say, we're being categorized again, but I'm really thankful that some of these steps are actually being taken. And unfortunately, some of our ancestors that didn't get the chance to be acknowledged, I want to acknowledge them in that sense, that we're being patient, we're being loving, we're being understanding, just like when we talk about our genesis, or where we come from, because we talk about the ideal of religion, another category. It's really it's a way of life. In each of our genesis stories, or each of our beginning of who we are, there's a story of how we came about in life. For the Yurikara, we refer to it Nishana Najatao, or Diach Wuruchti, is our chief that sits above our sacred father. But we have a deity, a female deity. And you know, the neat thing about understanding our traditions and the way things really are set in place by our Creator, by all of our creators, is that having a balance between the male and female, that we're designating them. And I think that's kind of really based on human nature, but the ideal of our Creator not being really a male orientated or not female orientated, but something other, something greater than that. But our mother corn in our story was one of the very important parts to us, a part to our being, and she still is today. Now, Mother Corn, in one part of our story, is that we believe that Mother Corn brought us to this earth, that we were in darkness, and we were as kernels of corn, and the certain animals came along and helped us dig us out of the earth and brought us to the earth, and we transformed ourselves to Satnish, to the people. We followed her, we listened to her, we loved her, we cared about her, we talked to her, and we honored her. In one of the stories, they talk about two beings that were following us. These two beings, as we followed Mother Corn, where she was going to take us to where we would end up living at one point, and it's where we would flourish and lives would go. These two beings were following us, and pretty soon the people they got afraid. They got afraid and they ran over and they grabbed Mother Corn and they hung on to her dress and they were crying. They said, Mother Corn, they said, our mother, we love you, but we're afraid. We're afraid because there are two things that are following us and we don't know what they are. So our Mother Corn, she, like good mothers, she made them sit down. She said, my children, she said, you sit down. She said, sit down and sit here. I'm going to go over there and visit those two things that are following you. I'll be right back. So pretty soon Mother Corn, she went over to go visit these two things, these two beings. Pretty soon she came back. She came back and she gathered her children. She said, my children, come and sit beside me, she said. Sit around me like this, she said. I was over there and I spoke to those two beings that were following you. I want you to know that these two beings are going to be with you all your life. In the springtime, when the thunders return, when the power comes, and the rain and the thunders and lightning come, when that rain hits the ground and grass starts to grow and things start to change, life comes back to earth. You should feed them and acknowledge them, get to know them. You should feed them, take food to them, and go and pray and talk to them. Corn and beans and squash and meat. Take it to them and go to this first being and offer it to them. This first being. Go there and cry and ask for forgiveness and ask for pity for your own life and for your family and for your relatives and your people. The first being is sickness. Then go to that second being. Prepare that same meal and go there and offer it to that second being and sit down and talk to it. Ask for pity for your family, for your life, and for all the people. That second one is death. Now these two beings are going to be with you all your life when you're on this earth and when you pass over it and go across the river to your relatives, to the ancient ones. Acknowledge them because the Creator put them in our lives, in your lives, so that you can appreciate the life that you have. And so that was a part of our Genesis story that really kind of talked about the ideal of understanding about sickness and understanding about death and life and appreciating it. Along with that came teachings that Mother Corn passed on to us. Our Mother Corn, before she left us, she gave us teachings. Now these teachings were really about making a better world for ourselves. Not only just for ourselves, but for the whole world and all these different nations that live on this earth. That you're always to be good to other people. That you're always to work hard. To always to give to the poor. Don't argue. Don't fight. That you should counsel other people that are in need of your teachings and your caring and your love. All these teachings were given to the people, Sotnish people, so that we share these things. And so each of the different tribes here in the United States, here in what they call Turtle Island, the people of the First Nations, they had these teachings, they had these understandings, they have them. But we're starting to lose some of them because we become more like Sunshtaga, we become more like non-native people. We follow the rules and we follow these things, now we're lost. But now we're starting to regain some of these things back by responsible and loving people that are taking the time to educate and to reteach those teachings as well as the language and the understandings. But also we have to understand that not just for Satnish people or Sa-Satnish people, non-native people as well. For different tribes as well. Shuchtano, those ones that the people from Mexico and Asian people and all non-native people as well. That these teachings are unifying us together to have a respect, to acknowledge individuals as the spiritual beings that they are. To listen to Mother Corn's teachings, always have those, and to carry them on to other people. To make a better world. Less chaos and more industrial, loving communities. As an artist, that's what I do. I struggle, and I'm a human just like everybody else. I work hard at what I do. And a lot of times the things that I do, I'm alone a lot of times. But I'm not really alone. So the ideal of acknowledging all those stories and all those things that go on with Indigenous Peoples Day is a very important part, a real small part when we acknowledge only one nation or one group, throw us all together in one big pot. We're different. The Nishnabes are different. The Lakotas are different. The Satnish are different. The Pueblos, each different Pueblos are different. They have different language, different powers and understanding to our Creator. And to the non-native people as well. I go and I do residencies all over the country, and I've gone to different parts of the world. And what I really enjoy is meeting people. I don't hold that ideal of, well, you took our land, or you did this to us, you did that to us. But I also know the truth. I'm an educated individual in art as well, and in different areas. And so it's important for me to tell the truth, but I also have to listen to other people's truth as well. And then I have the opportunity to make those decisions on what works and what works for the teachings that I have in my world. When we talk about, my grandpa used to tell me anyway, a lot of our Indigenous people, we talk about, our Native people, we talk about having to live in two worlds. And so the ideal of living in two worlds is it makes sense, but it doesn't in another sense too. I've always been questioning that, because we have our own traditional ways, and we have the ways of a mainstream people. But yet, when my grandfather was alive, he told me, he says, we don't live in two worlds. We live in one world. The world that you create, your own self, that's your world. The people that you let into your world, they become part of your world. Sometimes we shed those relationships because they're not good for us. And sometimes we welcome these other ones because they're beneficial to us and our spirituality and who we are as a person. But he says we only live in one world. But we have to adapt ourselves into all these different ways and to communicate into different people's worlds. But we live in one world. The other thing I was talking, because we were also exposed to Christianity, the ideal of Catholicism. And I think with the ideal of Catholicism, or even Christianity, the idea of Christianity is conceptually is a very, very beautiful thing. The teachings are beautiful. But it's when human beings start manipulating and start making them into something they're really not. And that's when it really damages the soul of other people. And so one of the things I talked to, there was a priest. His name was Father Stevens. He was in our area. Father Stevens is I really liked him. He was a good man. Of course, he's gone now. And so we could ask him anything. And my younger brother Marlon and I would ask him all these crazy questions because Father Stevens was a gunner in the war. And so we asked him about those things. But then we finally I asked him, I said, Father, you know, in the Bible it talks about, in Revelations it talks about the end of the world and all the different things that are going to happen, and you know, the trumpets will blow and these horsemen will come and all these different things will happen, you know. What does that really mean? Is this kind of a literal thing that's going to happen? Is that what the church is telling people? And so Father told me, he says, the end of the world will be when you pass on. That'll be the end of the world. He said some of those teachings are only reference certain things. They're not literal. But the end of the world happens when your spirit leaves your body. And so I really think that was a really important part of understanding some part of Christianity, I guess, but also understanding the teachings that I had from my grandfather and from the other people that I ceremonied with. So Indigenous Peoples Day is a lot more than just having a birthday party or a celebration like the ideal of Martin Luther King Day, his birthday. Martin Luther King was an amazing man, very, very an amazing man with a lot of influence as well as understanding of bringing people together. One of the speeches he talked about having a dream. I have a dream. And in that speech he was talking about, I have a dream that young white children and black children will be able to walk hand in hand together. I think that's really a beautiful idea. Then as I became more educated and more understanding and questioning more, what about Native people? What about us walking hand in hand with white people, with black people, with Asian people, with Arabic people, or what about Native people? Why are we always last? Why are we not recognized the way we should? That's got me questioning. And so the ideal of Indigenous Peoples Day, again, is really taking all these different tribes and just throwing them all in one little bunch and say, okay, we gave you a day now. But I also am very, very thankful, very, very thankful to all my non-native friends, collectors, and people that I've met over the years, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people over the years, traveled to different parts of the world. And as an artist, I tell the stories, I tell the teachings, but I also am academically taught as well, educated in art and history and religion. And so it really gives me an ideal of being able to take parts of things and understand how this works within my world. And so before I get a little further, I want to talk a little bit about my work. But I have another teaching I think is really important, I think, for all of us to understand, and that's it's really the acknowledgement of people. One moment, please. This is a wooden bowl. I use this in some of the classes or some of the presentations I present to. And so one of the teachings really was, because we were talking about respect, we're talking about individuality, we're talking about honoring each other's culture and language and ceremonies and so on and so forth, but also about developing good, healthy relationships with friends or companions, whatever the case may be. And so the wooden bowl teaching is really something that my grandfather told me. And so it's really helped me to understand how to build better relationships with people. Now, with the wooden bowl, represents a tree, and the tree represents the tree of life. And of course, the Celtic people, they have acknowledgement and they have the teachings about the tree of life, and so do Indigenous people, Native people, a lot of Native people do. And so the tree of life in my teaching is that the trunk represents us living today. All the branches and all the leaves and so on, they represent all future generations, even the unborn generations that are coming, because they're closest to the heavens. And the roots that go into the ground for the tree represent all our ancestors. We're all connected. We're all connected spiritually and even biologically through our DNA. And so we go back to Mother Earth, and we reside in Mother Earth. But we become this circle. And so the bowl itself, the ideal of it, containing something, substance, is important, and it's part of the tree of life. And so if I was to invite you to my home, this is part of the teaching, and I was to cook for you, because I'm a pretty good cook, and you guys were all sitting around the living room waiting for me to get my food done, and it smells so good in my house, and boy, you were really hungry, and you were sitting there waiting, and it took a long time. Now, if I was to take this bowl, and while you guys are all sitting around and there was a coffee table in the middle, and I took it and I put little crumpled pieces of paper in there. I put little bolts in there. I put maybe some pebbles in there. I put some paper clips in there. I put a whole bunch of them in there, and then I put sprinkled M&Ms in there. I put it there, and pretty soon I came out of the kitchen and I was carrying this in there, right where you guys are all there, sitting there hungry. And I take this bowl, and it was filled all the way full with all those things in there. And I told you guys, I said, in about 10 more minutes that food's going to be ready. So here's something for you guys. If you guys are hungry or you guys want something to snack on, these are some things for you. And so I take it and I put it right in that little coffee table. And all you guys would be sitting around there looking like this, looking at that bowl with all those things in there. In there, you'd be looking at all those things, and they're different, you know. Some of you could say, hey, wonder why he gave us all these strange things. All these paper clips and these papers and stuff. But there'd be some of you that would take the time to look in there, and then you would move those paper clips and those bolts and papers away, and then you would take those M&Ms and you would eat them. You wouldn't wait for everybody else. You would just select the ones that you want. And so the teaching really is that this vessel here, this bowl, this tree of life, is really the relationships that we develop with people. This here is the person. Inside of them is all the different things, the shortcomings and all the beautiful things that have inside of us. When we develop these relationships with people, I'm told that we take the things out of here that work best for us, and we acknowledge them. But we also acknowledge those other things that we can't use. So we make the best out of that, and we make it our own. And then the rest of it, we say, well, I don't want any of these here because I can't use them. They have no use in my life, in my world. It's like horse training. I was a horse trainer for many, many years. And my Uncle Ed used to always tell me, he says, nephew, he says, when you work with this horse, I always remember bring out the best. Bring out the best in him. And so what I'd do is I'd look at all the different ways that it carried itself, and I would do the best that I could to bring out that part of it. And so, referencing the ideal of how we communicate with people and acknowledge who they are is important during this time. Indigenous People Day is a very, very small step. Get to know us by our tribe. Get to know us by our ceremonies. Get to know us by individual name. Get to know who we are as people, as human beings. But also know that you have qualities that are beautiful as well. You have a tradition, you have a culture that goes all the way back. Even if you cross the Great Water, your ancestors crossed the Great Water. My grandpa said, when the Sunshtaga, when the non-native people came across the Great Water, he said, and when they wanted to be their own people, he said, a lot of them, many of them, he said, they cut their umbilical cord to their mother, and they wanted to be these new people. The umbilical cord is still there. We can still tie into that umbilical cord to our mother and acknowledge who we are as a people. Amarikara Hiratsa Crow. And so I acknowledge that part of me, those parts of me. And I respect those that acknowledge where they come from. Even if you don't know where you come from, I still have respect for you. We're in a time right now where there's a lot of hurtful things and traumatic things going on in the world. But to acknowledge where we come from, acknowledge our ancestors, acknowledge the people that struggled hard to help us become where we're at today. As I said before, Indigenous Peoples Day is a day to acknowledge Indigenous peoples. But there's over 574 different tribes. Within those tribes are different societies, different clans, different ways of life. So it's important to be able to have those acknowledgement of those individual tribal nations. As an artist, I travel all over the place and I tell my stories. One of the most inspirational things that happened during my coursework as an artist was to read about a person that lived on this earth and was died in 1914 was an individual they called Ishi, which means man in Yahi. This sculpture I did here back in 2000 was inspired by the Repatriation Act and the reclaiming of Ishi's remains during the time that when Ishi, he was a part of the Yahi and Yana tribe from California, and he was the last of his people. The rest of his people were wiped out. They were hunted and killed like animals. Ishi got to witness his sister and his mother being killed by ranchers. So he was the last of his people. I did this piece not just to honor Ishi, but to honor other Native peoples, and to start thinking about our tribal nations, our culture, our language, our ceremonies. And so you see, part of it is done in a stone-like surface. The other one is in clay, the skeleton. And so it shows either one of two things, depending on how you view it. Either the death of a culture or a people, or the rebirth. Us as individuals have to take that claim to be able to see ourselves reborn and to regenerate our ancestral way of life. Otherwise we see the death of our way of life. This red line represents the blood of the people. Red represents the blood of the people. White means purity. Gray means transition or the unknown. And so this angle that I put into his forehead really represents the severity and the tragic way that he passed on. And so you see him looking upward in the stone side. And so what that is that he's looking into the stars. He's crying because he's the last of his people at that time. He's lonesome for his people, so he looks into stars. And so this is a piece, it's a very dramatic piece that I did in clay, but it really talks about the ideal of genocide. Genocide of culture, genocide of a people. It's a reminder to us that we have to make changes, recognizing individuals and cultures. The other one that I wanted to share with you was another piece that I've done that toured the United States. It's called Removing the Color from the People. And this particular piece was done on it's a paper, a letterhead from the United States Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And it's from the office of General Pat, or I should say Captain Richard Pratt. And Richard Pratt was an individual that during the time of displacing Indigenous peoples, there was a time back in 1897 where Captain Pratt had took the opportunity to propose a congressional project to take Native children from their families and to move them out east and to teach them how to be American citizens, to be like non-Native people, not the merciless savages that they were, as mentioned in our congressional, our Constitution. And so a lot of it was passed, and a lot of children were taken from their homes. They were taken from their homes, and of course they taught them how to sweep a floor and to, different things that they were taught. And of course during that time, some of those children never made it home. They died from sicknesses that they contracted from people in out east. Some of them were hurt in different ways, but yet some of them learned some valuable things in life. And so the ideal of being able to tell these stories is so important to know that there are so much history and so much important stories that need to be told about these native tribes, these 570 plus tribes, the different things that happen to them and us. But getting back to our teachings with our Mother Corn, is the ideal is being able to provide a better world and being able to care and respect each other's culture and who we are. I'm very fortunate to have taken what I believe in as a child, to be an artist and travel, let it take me all over the different parts of the world and all over the country and meet hundreds and different people. Just to hear the stories. Some don't want to hear the stories and some are willing to hear the stories. But our part of us is making family. There's another incident when we were growing up, is that when I was growing up, there was a time that I was ashamed to be an Arikara. And part of it was because some of the other tribes around me knew that I was Arikara, and they would say to me, even some of the teachers, they would say, your people are enemies. They went against their own people. They were scouts for the 7th Cavalry during the Battle of Little Bighorn. And so being as young as I was, I didn't really understand the concept of why would we go against our own native people. And so later on I learned and I asked and I studied and found out why. The ideal that we had to for our survival. But it wasn't the ideal of us being traitors to our own people, but we had to survive. But also the ideal that I've learned also with Lakota people, they were also scouts against us with Leavenworth when they attacked our villages. So at some point in our lives, we sided with enemies, and also we battle against enemies. So there's a lot to learn about our history and learn about our ways. But I do want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. I have so much more stories that I want to tell, but I just want you to leave this with you. Indigenous Peoples Day is a very, very small step to understanding us, Native people. There's so much more that each one of our tribes and our peoples and our teachers have to share with the world. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm very honored to be able to speak on behalf of this small step in history. Thank you.